Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics who write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs. And currently, I'm teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today's guest is Dr. Ranya Nehmeh, author of the book In Praise of the Office: The Limits to Hybrid and Remote Work. Raina, welcome. It's so nice to have you.
Thanks so much, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here.
Before we talk about the book, I would like you to get us up to speed about how you got to where you're at professionally.
Sure. So I've spent more than 20 years actually working in international organizations in senior HR roles, primarily at the European Central Bank in Frankfurt and at the OPEC Fund in Vienna. Currently, I am the founder of Elevar, which is an HR advisory and executive training practice. I speak and write about HR, about leadership, about the future of work, and I also lecture at a university in Vienna. And as you mentioned, also an author. I've authored this book with Professor Peter Capelli from Wharton, and I think we will be
I know
discussing.
Peter.
You know him, okay?
Yeah, yeah, I've had him on my show before a
Oh,
few
great.
years ago.
Okay. So yeah, so I had the pleasure of publishing. Actually, we've published several things together as well, several Harvard Business Review articles, some other chapters in different books. And so yeah,
And my favorite magazine of all is the Harvard Business Review. I
great.
think
Well, we
that's
have three
my,
articles in there, and the last one, which was related to this one, yeah, received was quite controversial, but I think I hope in a good way. So
and I'm probably sure I read that article because I've been getting this magazine for at least 5 years. I just think it's awesome. So let's jump into your book. Um, Chapter one, does it matter where we do white collar work? Many people assume that the work is simply about completing tasks. Why do you argue that where we work fundamentally changes how work gets done?
I think because work isn't simply about completing tasks. And I think that's what a lot of people sometimes kind of forget. It's also about solving problems together. It's about building trust. It's about learning from others and making better decisions. So in that sense, location really changes all of these things because work is actually social before it becomes transactional.
You describe the office as much more than a building. What role has the office historically played that many people have forgotten? And how do you feel about companies now, it's like JP Morgan, forcing people to come back into the office?
I think the office has always been a place where like knowledge, where relationships, where culture is transferred. So long before kind of, Zoom, organizations relied on proximity because that's how people learn, that's how they collaborated, that's how they build trust. And I think we forget sometimes that because those benefits are largely invisible until they're gone. And how do I feel about people forcing people to come back into the office? Well, I think that there's ways of doing it, and I think a lot of organizations have not done it well, but I think we will discuss that anyway, perhaps a bit later.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I do have an opinion on people working in the office, which is there's certain professions like lawyer or accountant or even investment banker. But in a lot of things, especially for young people, how do you get mentored to become a leader? And how do people evaluate you if they want you to be a leader, if they can't interact with you on a daily basis? So I think there's some good logical reasons for
Yeah.
why people should come back. But I think for some of the big companies that have such a big investment in real estate, they don't want to sit empty for the lease that might be 10 years or more going on.
Yeah.
Um, During the pandemic, many people believe remote work was the future forever. At what point did you begin questioning that assumption?
Well, I would say probably around 2022, when the conversation became like surprisingly one-sided. It became really like remote good, office bad. But I think the conversation and the debate is much more nuanced than that and much more complex. Everyone was measuring kind of productivity, but very few were measuring collaboration, innovation, mentoring, those things that you just highlighted, or culture, because those are very slow moving indicators, but often they also determine long-term success. You cannot see them straight away. That's why it took us some years to see that they perhaps were not working as well.
I mean, I've done 30 startups and I could see the value of people coming into the office. But back in the mid 90s, I ran a multimedia company with 30 people and I gave everybody the option to work at home. This was back in the mid 90s. And everybody thought that was crazy. But I knew that these people were so hardworking that we would actually get more hours, that they would spend more time working for us. And we saw productivity go up like 27%. And those who couldn't work from home, they had to come back in,
Yeah,
or they had to leave the company. But early on, we did, but it's very hard to develop leadership skills if you're not actually interacting with people on a daily basis.
for sure.
Um,
Especially for young people, by the way, especially
yeah.
for young people. Yeah.
If you could challenge one popular myth about remote work that emerged from COVID-19, what would that be?
I would really say that the biggest myth is that flexibility and being in the office are opposites, because they don't have to be. You don't have to be either one camp or the other camp. You can find ways to do it well. I think the best organizations, they don't choose one or the other. They combine flexibility with intentional moments of coming together. And I think the key word really is intentional.
In chapter two, what we learn, what we lose with remote work, your research suggests that organizations lose far more than productivity when employees work remotely. What surprised you the most?
I think what surprised us the most was that the biggest losses were not immediate, in the sense that they really accumulated quietly. Organizations don't suddenly stop innovating. Like relationships, they take time to slowly weaken. Knowledge flows less freely. New ideas emerge less often. So these things really take time.
You emphasize the importance of informal conversations. Why are these seemingly small interactions so valuable?
Yeah, because they really sometimes help to solve problems that you did not even know existed. A lot of breakthrough conversations aren't scheduled, they just happen accidental. When you meet somebody having a coffee, let's say, you make a coffee together in the office, and then it's like, can I just pick your brains on something? And then before you know it, this could lead to an idea or a brainstorm or something else. So some of these interactions happen accidentally.
What about just getting to know people? Like
Yeah.
I ran this one company and my partner was the former president CEO of American Express, and he liked to sit in the bullpen with everybody else. I liked the idea of my own office to be able to think and strategize, but
Yeah.
he said you really don't get to know people that way. I mean, he ran a $34 billion business and he shunned the office and moved in with everybody else. And he said, just listening to everybody and getting to know about their kids playing football and what their favorite movies were bonded the team more. How do you feel about that?
I completely agree. And when we talk about culture, that is what forms culture, like the CEO or something sitting in the playpen with everybody. That is becomes part of the culture of the organization, maybe informal, very communicative, very like humble, down to earth, So all of this is what forms the culture. And all of this we do not see when you are working remotely.
Yeah, I remember meeting CEOs at big conferences who loved the idea of working remotely. And I thought, how do you really get to manage people or interact with them? And the CEO, former CEO of Chipotle, who is now the CEO of Starbucks, only comes in one day a week. I read in the Wall Street Journal. And I think, how are you going to get to know people and come up with the best ideas if in fact you are only seen 1 day a week at the office. What do you think about that?
I think that leaders play a very big role in modeling the behavior, of course, of their employees. So when you show up only once a week, then you're basically saying to everybody else that it's okay to show up once a week. But if you've mandated people to come in every single day and you only show up once a week, I think this is shows, this is not the kind of culture that you really typically want to create because it goes very opposite to what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. How does remote work affect innovation differently than it affects individual productivity?
Yeah, I mean, I think for individual productivity, if as you said before, if you're a lawyer, you know what you're doing, perhaps you could do it alone. It requires long hours of concentration. You can do that, for example, I think from home with no problem. Now, innovation is something that is not usually done alone. It's something that you do together. And that I think is important because you need to be with people for that. So it does show.
Um, new employees of New employees often struggle the most in remote environments. Why is learning by observation so difficult to replace?
I think we learn far more by watching, really, than what is being taught. In the sense that new employees, they really notice how experienced colleagues, how they deal with certain situations, how they negotiate, how they influence, how they prioritize and make decisions. I think those lessons are incredibly difficult to capture on a Teams call. And just to add here, I saw an article last week also that Revolut, now they're asking their young graduates, I think from 2027 onwards, although they're a remote first company, but they're asking their graduates to be in the office, I think for the first year, at least 3 times a week, because they have recognized that the early stages of a career benefit from in-person interactions.
I have to say that we found out in education that it's much better for them to be in class than to be
Yeah.
remote. Even when the ones who are like, let's say that they are doing a semester abroad and they have to take a couple classes at our university,
Yeah.
they don't get half as much up. I mean, literally half as much because they're not interacting with their classmates and they're not interacting with the professor. And the students didn't, being home every day, they hated it. I mean, they were
Yeah.
glad to come back because I remember I was a trustee in the 90s for the statewide universities in my country in Pennsylvania. And they thought with online education, that'd be the end of physical universities. And I
Yeah.
said,
No.
what would make you think that? How are they going to meet their significant other? How are they going to have fun? Nobody wants to be locked up in their room and all they do is study and take classes. And the other thing we found was that students start multitasking or playing video games and are not focused on the work, and then it shows up. So I don't know why people thought that this would be a good idea overall for especially young people to train them in companies.
Yeah, absolutely.
What warning signs should executives watch for before declining collaboration begins hurting organizational performance?
Well, I think, when you have more meetings, but for example, less alignment, or, when decisions take longer, or when there are fewer new ideas, or slower onboarding, or even higher turnover of younger employees, I think these are usually symptoms that collaboration is weakening.
In chapter 3, which model is right for your organization? Many organizations are searching for the perfect role model, work model. Does one universal solution exist? And could you give examples about what you think works in different industries?
I do not think that there is actually a perfect work model, and there's only the right model that works for your own organization. And I think organizations should stop asking what is the best model, but instead really ask what kind of work are we trying to enable. So as we said before, maybe like the more concentrated, like maybe even law firms, you can have some people working remote sometimes. If you have more managerial roles, you may want to focus more on the in-person collaboration and, seeing people in person. But of course, every industry is different. Also in academia, yes, you can have hybrid, but as we said, sometimes it is better to have it in person. So there is no ideal scenario. I think it's just, every organization has to do their own audit of what's working and what's not working.
What questions should CEOs ask before deciding whether to adopt remote, hybrid, or fully in-office work? And do you think certain industries it makes more sense than others?
I think the questions that one should ask or the CEO should ask is what work requires collaboration, or where does innovation happen? How do people learn? Who needs mentoring? If leaders answer those questions really honestly, I think the work model often becomes much clearer.
You discuss coffee badging as a symptom rather than real problem. Can you explain what it reveals about workplace culture and explain coffee badging?
Yeah. Well, coffee badging is actually a term that emerged, which is when you come into the office, you clock in, you badge in, you come in, you have a coffee, maybe with a colleague, and then you leave. So maybe you just pop in for like 10 minutes or 1 hour, because you have to be there, right? Because it's being monitored. Now, I don't think coffee badging, that's not really the problem. I think the problem is feedback. Because it provides us with feedback. It tells leaders that employees don't see the value of being in the office. And if people leave after an hour of being there, the question is not so much actually why are they leaving, but is why should they stay? Because I think it's important to note that attendance does not equal engagement. So if they don't see the reason for staying, then that's a symptom for a deeper problem.
What do you think about hoteling?
I think employees generally don't like hoteling because obviously, there's so many issues about that. Like they don't want to have share different spaces. Maybe they want to have their own space. But okay, with a lot of organizations also they cut down physical space. So hoteling is the option that a lot of companies are reverting to. So yeah.
I think it's a cost savings. I
Yeah.
don't, I think managing partners or whatever and go, hey, we're almost out of our lease. This is a great time for us to reduce our real estate footprint. And we're lawyers or we're accountants or whatever. And we don't really need that. So they just come in and bring their laptop, sit in there like a coffee shop, right?
Yeah.
And use it. But it's just a way to save money as opposed to thinking about how that affects the overall culture. Would you say
Yeah,
that?
because 100%, because actually for the culture, it does not help the culture. Because at the end of the day, you come and you sit. Sometimes you might be sitting in places that have nothing to do with, like, your team is not around you. So actually, it doesn't help either the team and it does not help in terms of creating this collaboration. So yes, I agree.
What distinguishes organizations that make hybrid work successful from those that struggle?
I think the main thing is that they design hybrid intentionally. So office days need to have a purpose. Teams come together for collaboration, coaching, relationship building, and not simply just to answer emails from different desks. I think the worst thing that you can ask people to do is to drive in to the office to sit all day in a Zoom meeting by yourself. So I think that completely defeats the purpose.
How should leaders balance employee flexibility with organizational effectiveness without creating resentment? And also, how are they able to um, evaluate employees if they're not really seeing them and just the output of the actual work itself? Because I think there's more to evaluating someone's value to a company than just the final output.
Well, I think flexibility should not mean that everyone does whatever they want, for starters. So it means, giving people autonomy while protecting the activities that require people to come together. And I think that is where leaders play a very big role in determining what needs to bring us together, like mentoring, like problem solving, like brainstorming, all of these things. And when it comes to like, yeah, performance and how do you judge people's performance? Of course, that is where leaders have play a key role because they're the ones who many of them have not been trained for hybrid leadership. And hybrid leadership, of course, you have to avoid things like the proximity bias. When people are not around, you tend to forget about them. The people in office, you remember them. So all of this requires a lot of training and regular conversations with your employees.
As an HR expert and professional, did you end up creating different evaluation tools for this remote kind of work?
Actually, no. But I think because the main thing that we're saying is it's a matter of conversation. It's a matter of actually just having these regular conversations with your employees, not necessarily ones that are about meeting your KPIs, but about ones that are also development related to how are you, quick check-ins. I think these are crucial, and these also help you detect if there's any issues happening that you may not know about.
In chapter 4, how management practices must change to support remote and hybrid. Why do traditional management practices often fail in remote and hybrid environments?
Because many managers are still managing visibility instead of outcomes. I think that is crucial here. Remote work exposes weak management practices that, which already existed maybe before. And that's what I mentioned, about the proximity bias and, this notion of visibility, out of sight, out of mind. If they don't see you, they might not be able to, perhaps they think that you're not doing enough work. So this is, all of these biases require training, require awareness, require regular conversations.
How should leaders rethink performance management when they no longer see employees every day?
Exactly. It's about measuring contribution. You have to find ways to measure a contribution, measure impact, measure collaboration rather than presence. At the same time, don't ignore behaviors that really help others to succeed, because as a manager, one of your big roles is, of course, to coach people, right? To help them. So maybe this can also be included in your KPIs.
What mistakes do managers commonly make when trying to build accountability remotely?
I think leaders, they either over monitor their people, so they really micromanage and over monitor, or they kind of disappear. And I think neither way is good. The answer is just greater clarity, regular conversations, and clear expectations.
How can organizations strengthen career development for employees who spend less time in the office?
Here, I would also say again, you have to be much more intentional. Promotions should not go to whoever happens to be most visible or whoever happens to spend more time in the office. Managers need structured mentoring, regular career conversations, and meaningful developmental assignments.
How can organizations strengthen career development for employees who spend less time in the office?
If they spend less time in the office, that's when every manager should really, again, have these regular conversations and set clear expectations of what is expected.
Yeah, do you think companies should be like assigning reading like universities might do? So they might be assigning articles to read in Harvard Business Review, creating videos to educate them, maybe do more online training. How could they utilize those tools or it doesn't really add more value?
Well, when it comes to reading and things, I would not say that because, in a lot of fast-paced industries, they don't have time to, I think, to read and to take their time to understand that. I do think that training is essential, and I think that can be done either online training, hybrid, in person. It doesn't matter, but there really can be a lot of training done because a lot of managers were never trained actually to lead in hybrid settings. So there's a lot of space for improvement in that respect.
Um, if every manager adopted just one new leadership habit tomorrow, which would create the biggest positive impact?
I would say it's spend less time checking people's work and more time coaching people. Because great managers, they really tend to create capability and not dependency. I think that's crucial.
In chapter 5, rebuilding social relationships wherever you work, you argue that relationships, not office buildings, create organizational success. Why is that distinction so important?
I think it's important because at the end of the day, we did not write a book about offices. What we wrote is a book about relationships. The office simply happens to be one of the best environments that has been created, to build relationships. But at the end of the day, it's really about relationships.
What practice steps can organizations take to intentionally rebuild social capital?
I think you need to design opportunities for people to work together, not just sit together. That's what we were talking, about when you're sitting in different like hoteling. So it's really about how do people work together. So cross-functional projects, mentoring, learning sessions, project kickoffs, communities of practice. I think all of these things, they help to intentionally rebuild social capital.
What practical steps can organizations take to intentionally, why are mentorship and onboarding more important today than they were in the pandemic?
Well, because careers are they now increasingly depend on informal learning. So the less time people spend together, naturally, the more organizations have to create those opportunities intentionally. I think before the pandemic, mentorship and onboarding happened almost by accident, right? So new hires overheard conversations, asked spontaneous questions, observed experienced colleagues. Today, these moments are far less frequent, which means that organizations have to be much more intentional.
Many virtual meetings leave employees feeling disconnected. How should organizations redesign meetings to improve engagement?
I think the biggest mistake or organizations make is using meetings to share information instead of using it to create value. Information can be sent in advance, but meetings should be reserved really for discussion, for decision making, for problem solving, for relationship building. If people leave a meeting feeling that they could have read an email instead, then it was not a good meeting.
How can leaders create strong organizational culture when employees rarely occupy the same physical space?
Culture isn't what leaders write, or, it is what employees repeatedly experience. So leaders have to deliberately create shared moments instead of assuming that they will happen naturally. So that example, Mark, that you gave before about the CEO and the playpen, that is how you build that culture.
In chapter 6, bringing employees back to the office, why has returning employees to the office become such an emotional issue instead of simply an operational decision? And by the way, in Asia, um, they just said, okay, pandemic's over, everybody back to work. They didn't say to people, hey, you have the option of working remotely. That wasn't even an option. I don't even think the people even considered that
Mhm.
as an option. I mean, there are foreigners who moved to Vietnam and are working remotely, but anybody who works for a Vietnamese company like I do, that's not even a consideration.
Mhm. I think People think it is a bit debate about location, but actually, it is really a debate about trust, about identity, about autonomy, about the future of work. So, what happened is that a few years into the pandemic, organizations were so unsure. So they started with, oh, you should be back by this time. And then it didn't happen. And then they extended it by 6 months. So then we were like 3 years into the pandemic and people were still not, in the office yet properly. And since then, I think now it's become an expectation of employees to have this level of flexibility. And they associate it with trust. Oh, our organizations don't trust us. They want us to come back to the office so they can monitor us. So the whole narrative has changed quite a bit.
And there's been software built in, right, that some
Exactly.
companies use to see how much time you're actually working,
Yeah,
as opposed to doing whatever. Or they're even controlling. They make you take the corporate laptop and ESPN and everything else, like all the sites that you might want to visit during the course of the day are blocked out, and you can't go and see them as a way to
exactly.
make sure that they're getting optimal use. But then there are people who end up working way more hours because it's there for them, right? And you have to worry about burnout.
Exactly.
What mistakes have organizations made when implementing return to office mandates?
The biggest mistake is mandates without explanation. Leaders often tell employees what to do, but they forget to kind of explain why being together matters. And I think that is a big issue that organizations have done, which they have not explained why you need to be in the office. So employees automatically assume, well, I've been doing my work for the last year without a problem. Why does this have to change now?
How can leaders communicate return to office policies without damaging trust and morale that you just spoke about?
Yeah, I think you do not sell the policy, but you have to sell the purpose. Now, in the book, we actually mention what we call the bond framework, which is how to bring people back to the office, or at least even in a hybrid way. And the idea is really it's not about forced attendance, but it's about creating meaning. And what the bond stands for is really, build the case for connection. So show the benefits for connecting, own the expectation, be clear about what you expect from people, normalize engagement, create these rhythms and practices that draw people in naturally and demonstrate inclusion. So make sure everyone, regardless of where they're working, feels, part of the organization's story. And this kind of shifts the narrative from mandates to meaning.
Looking ahead 5 years, what do you believe the most successful workplaces will look like?
I think the best organizations won't be fully remote or fully office based. I think they will be intentionally built. They'll match where people work to the work that they're actually doing.
If you were advising a CEO today, what would your roadmap be for creating a workplace that employees generally want to be part of?
I would say start with the work, not the workplace. So what I mean here is, map your critical activities, decide which benefit from being together and which perhaps don't. Train managers to ensure that they understand how to lead in hybrid environments, measure collaboration, learning, and innovation as well, not just productivity.
Uh, Here and you zip right through all the questions that we had for you. We will have be done earlier, way earlier than I expected. If every CEO and HR leader and manager remembered only one lesson from in praise of the office, what would you hope they carry with them long after finishing the book?
I think it's very important not to confuse flexibility with effectiveness. So the goal is not really to maximize kind of remote work or office work, but it is to create organizations where people perform, learn, and really thrive together. So I think when we talk about the future of work, it's not really about where we work as much as how well we work together.
Whoops. Imagine we're having this conversation 10 years from now. What do you hope organizations have learned about balancing technology, flexibility, and the uniquely human relationships that make great workplaces possible?
Well, I hope by that time that we will stop asking whether remote work or office work, which one has won, because right now it seems very one-sided. And I think that is usually the wrong question. The organizations that succeed will be those that have used technology to enhance human connection and not necessarily to replace it. So AI will transform, of course, how work gets done, but relationships will still determine whether organizations adapt, innovate, and how they succeed as well.
What's the role that AI is playing in remote work now? Or what role do you see it playing, and how will that change the dynamic?
I think a lot of organizations right now, are still in the first phase of AI adoption. So they're still trying to figure out exactly what to implement and how to implement it. I think in the next years, we're going to see a lot about hopefully the return on that investment, because I think right now there's a lot of studies that there is still no ROI. Or at least not as much as expected when it comes to AI implementation. And of course, it will also change about how we work, because at the end of the day, it's not just about the technology, but it's really about how will employees work with that technology. And that is a change management exercise. So in that sense, when you have a change management exercise, it's also more difficult to do in a hybrid setting. So you really need to also understand how to do that as well. And that's gonna again require a lot of training, I think.
I also tell our students here that now it's the most competitive time in history because you're not only competing against people around the world, but you're competing against AI. And if you can't voice your ideas in a public forum at your company, they're not going to keep you. And working remotely will actually retard their ability to communicate ideas in a way that people can see that they're smart and capable. Even now we have students take the questions from the professor and just type it into AI and then ask AI
Yeah.
what to do. And I remind them, if you can't come up with these ideas on your own and you're reliant on AI, then why does your boss need you? This is almost like what's happening to computer programmers. Everybody I've talked to, I have a good friend's a CIO of a big international company. He had 50 programmers 2 years ago. Now he has two. Doesn't need them. I met the guy who created Zalo, which is a messaging app that's super popular in Southeast Asia. And he started another company and he had also 50 programmers. And now he said, I just have two that check the coding by AI.
Yeah.
So, how are employees going to show their capability if, in fact, they're not actually in the office and showing that it's not AI doing all the work for them, or that the employees are just not needed? Because look at all the Amazon and the other big companies are just slashing people and not retraining them.
Yeah. Mark, there's so many different issues here. And I think the first one is actually an organizational one because, imagine my work now as an employee, it took 8 hours to do. And now with AI, it takes me 2 hours to do. So what is happening to those remaining 6 hours? Am I going to get more work? Can I go home? Can I finish for the day? Or am I going to get more work to do? And I think a lot of organizations have not figured that out yet because that would require having to assess every single job and seeing which part can be done, let's say, by AI, and then really reviewing every single job, and then seeing, if that requires how we change that. So I think that is the first issue. The second issue is, of course, employees have a lot of fear because in many cases they do see that AI can do a lot what they can do and they can do it faster, right? So I think that what a lot of people are doing is they're trying to reskill themselves. Maybe the companies are not reskilling them, but they're trying to trying to learn AI on their own terms, in their own way, in their own free time.
I think before companies, of course, these guys are getting bonuses by letting people go and having better margins for the quarter. But I think maybe there even maybe should be mandates that say before you get rid of these people who have a lot of experience in your company, what would it mean by freeing them up to think about new ideas for products and services and maybe more efficiencies? Maybe you're using AI in the wrong way by getting rid of people. Maybe you should be using AI to challenge your people and those who can't come up with new ideas. I don't mean they have to be creative. They could be reading things online and coming up with stuff, but maybe retraining them to how better use AI to create more opportunity for the company. What's your thought on that, and how are you working with companies to maybe think in those terms?
But Mark, maybe just to step back, I read today an article from CNBC, I think, or something about how a lot of companies who laid off people because of AI, now they're rehiring them again because they said that actually they realized that was too premature. Because AI can, but also in many ways cannot replicate a lot of that human interaction and human connections that those employees were focused on. So it's really interesting. So people have been laid off, but now they're being rehired because of AI. So yeah, I think this is very interesting. And as I said, I believe we're still in the beginning of, companies and how they operate with AI. I don't think a lot of them have figured it out fully yet, if at all. And as you said, yes, many organizations are now looking at involving employees when it comes to the training. So it's, as I said, it's a change management exercise. It's not just here's the technology, run with it. It's more like, let's see, can you use this? Do you know how to use this? Let's work together to see how your role can become better because of AI. So, but this requires a lot of, time, a lot of leadership, like good leadership and good management. So I think it's still going to take a lot of time.
Well, what's the new CEO or what skill sets are the CEOs going to need in the next 5 years? Because I'm 65, and when I joined the workforce, the CEO was a king and emperor, and they didn't have and employees didn't have a lot of options. You were a drive time of wherever you were working. And so then over time, as the internet's taken off, now the CEO needs different skills because you can't just tell people, do this or you're fired. Because people just say, if I don't like working here, I can go remotely for somebody else, or I can move like to another country and work to that country. So what skills is HR training future leaders for? And what do you see? How do you see the workplace changing and maybe in the next 5 years?
I think that the more technological the workplace is becoming, the more human skills and human interaction we will require. So for me, the skills that I think are going to be important are emotional intelligence. Really, because that is crucial for leading people. Creativity, because that is something that, of course, AI can replicate creativity, but not in many ways. Also, critical thinking and judgment. Because at the end of the day, yes, we're all using AI, but you need to have some knowledge. You can't rely fully as well, on AI. And you need to understand what is something what can you use and what you can't. So, and I think here critical thinking and judgment is key. So I really think that for the next 5 years, the skills that we're going to need are going to be the human skills. I think that's going to be crucial.
How is HR going to change?
Well, I don't even think HR knows how HR will change yet. I think HR is going to have a very difficult role to play because HRO, we say that we are a strategic partner to the business, but a lot of conversations that are happening right now, especially in the AI space, many of them are not involving HR. So I think HR really has to figure out where it fits in this and how it can be a strategic partner to the business, especially when it comes to AI decisions.
Isn't that dependent on how the CEO views HR because my sister is a career HR person. She's headed up many organizations and some pretty sizable ones. And the smart CEOs, she's sitting in the room with the CFO, the heads of marketing, and everything, strategizing with them about how to train the future workforce. And then some CEOs look at you guys as just the benefits people and don't see the strategy part of it.
Yeah, I mean that is I would say quite an outdated view to have right now because I think we were having this conversation like even 20 years ago about, the strategic role of HR. And I think since the pandemic, the role of the HR has been elevated quite a bit because the HR was so crucial during the pandemic and, making things continue to work and also focusing on so many other things, mental health, psychological safety, feedback, moving everything in a hybrid way. So, and in terms of CEOs, I do think that quite a few CEOs now, they really do regard HR as important. However, HR has to play its part. And a lot of times I see, for example, even, that they are just talking about benefits and HR lingo instead of focusing more about, the business and what the business needs. And I recently wrote this people strategy playbook. And one of the issues of an HR of a people strategy, it's that oftentimes it's not aligned with the business outcomes, and that's if the CEO does not know how HR or how people strategy is aligned to the business, then we know that there is a big problem.
Um, here's my last question for you. What kind of training or future heads of HR are going to need?
I think that the future heads of HR will need the same kind of pretty much what I was mentioning, like emotional intelligence. I think that they will need that. I do think they will need critical thinking. They will need judgment, and maybe this is not training, but I think they also need to know how to prioritize because a lot of times HR says yes to everything and then they can't deliver because it's all too much. So I think we need to also be firm and say no sometimes to some things. So maybe that is not a training, but that is something that we need to learn how to say no to.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I enjoyed the book, and I hope that you'll be doing another one in the future that we can invite you back for. Please tell Peter I said hello. I spent 10 years teaching executive MBAs in the Wharton consulting practice that
Right.
was there.
That's
So
great.
everybody have a good rest of your weekend. Good July 4th for you, those of you who are in the US. And I'll look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care.